The defending ships moving away from it entirely. You want us to abandon our position? Asked Kesara. I want you to make them come to us on our terms instead of theirs. Jake highlighted the space around the station. There's an asteroid, field 2 light minutes away. Dense enough to provide cover, complex enough to hide in. And leave the station undefended? Yixtal's colors showed alarm. The station doesn't need to be defended if it's not under attack, Jake pointed out. The enemy can't shoot what they can't find. It took several attempts to convince the students to try the new approach. But when they finally committed to Jake's strategy, the results were dramatic. The defending ships retreated to the asteroid field as the enemy approached. The attackers, expecting a traditional defensive engagement, found empty space around their target. Confused by the lack of opposition, they began searching for the defenders. That's when Jake's plan revealed its true purpose. The asteroid field wasn't just cover, it was a trap. The defending ships used the asteroids as mobile weapons platforms, pushing rocks into the paths of enemy ships and using the complex gravitational fields to create unpredictable attack vectors. What should have been a straightforward assault became a chaotic nightmare for the attackers. Within minutes, the superior enemy force was scattered, confused, and taking casualties from threats they couldn't properly target. The few ships that managed to reach the station found themselves isolated and overwhelmed by defenders who appeared from unexpected directions. "We won," Yixtal said, her crystalline form displaying colors of amazement. "We actually won. You won because you stopped fighting the battle they wanted to fight and started fighting the battle you could win," Jake explained. Word of the exercise spread quickly through the academy. Soon, instructors from other departments were requesting Jake's input on their training programs. The rigid structure of traditional military education began to give way to more flexible, adaptive approaches. But the real validation came when Admiral Thisara returned for another inspection. This time, she brought with her a group of senior officers from the Union's Strategic Command. "Show them," she said simply. Jake stood before the assembled officers and activated a holographic display showing comparative training results. The data was striking. Students who had been exposed to his unconventional methods were performing significantly better in complex scenarios that required creative problem-solving. Traditional training produces excellent pilots, Jake began his presentation. They master their equipment, follow procedures perfectly, and execute established tactics with precision. But they struggle when faced with situations that don't match their training. He switched to a different display showing mission success rates. Our new approach doesn't just teach students how to fly. It teaches them how to think, how to adapt, how to turn any situation to their advantage. One of the senior officers, a stern-looking vegan with crystal features that showed skepticism, spoke up. "These methods seem to encourage indiscipline. Military effectiveness requires order, hierarchy, predictable responses." "Does it?" Jake asked. "Or does military effectiveness require winning?" He pulled up footage from the rescue mission that had started everything. "Alpha Team succeeded because we ignored standard procedures and adapted to the situation. The Raiders were expecting us to follow doctrine. When we didn't, they couldn't counter our actions. One successful mission doesn't prove your methods are superior," the skeptical officer countered. "You're right," Jake agreed. "One mission proves nothing. But look at this. The display showed simulation results from hundreds of training exercises. Students using traditional methods succeeded about 60% of the time in complex scenarios. Students trained with Jake's adaptive approach succeeded over 80% of the time. The data speaks for itself. Admiral Thisara said to the assembled officers. Pilot Morrison has demonstrated that innovation isn't just useful, it's essential. Another officer raised a concern. What happens when our enemies adapt to these new tactics? If we become predictably unpredictable, we lose our advantage. Jake smiled at the question. That's the beauty of teaching people to think instead of just teaching them procedures. When the enemy adapts to one innovation, we develop another. We stay ahead by constantly evolving. And you believe this approach can be scaled up? Asked the Admiral. Applied to entire fleets? I believe the principles can be scaled, Jake replied carefully. Teach commanders to see opportunities in obstacles. Encourage tactical flexibility over rigid doctrine. Create units that can adapt to any situation instead of units that are perfect for specific situations. The meeting continued for several more hours, with officers debating the implications of Jake's methods for the Union's military strategy. By the end, it was clear that Jake's influence was going to extend far beyond the academy. Months later, Jake stood once again on the observation deck, watching new students navigate their first training exercises. But now he wasn't alone. Instructors from across the academy had joined him, all of them eager to see how the latest group of pilot candidates would perform. Look at that, said Veltara, pointing to a human student who was using engine wash to redirect an obstacle instead of avoiding it. She's thinking like Morrison. Not like Morrison, Jake corrected gently. Like a human. We all think differently, but the principles are the same. See the problem from a new angle. Use whatever resources are available. Turn disadvantages into advantages. And you believe any species can learn to think this way? Asked Commander. Zethkar Jake watched as an Altarian student worked with a Vegan partner to solve a navigation puzzle using methods that weren't in any manual. I think they already are learning. We just had to show them it was possible. The academy had changed. Students no longer simply memorized procedures and perfected techniques. They learned to question assumptions, to experiment with new approaches, to see every challenge as an opportunity for innovation. But perhaps more importantly, they had learned that being different wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was a strength to be celebrated. As Jake watched the next generation of pilots push the boundaries of what was possible, he realized that Admiral Thisara had been right about one thing. The alien pilots had stopped laughing at humans. Now, they were learning from them instead. And that, Jake thought, was a much better kind of victory than anything he could have achieved alone in a cockpit. The human approach to problem-solving wasn't just changing how individuals flew, it was changing how the entire galaxy thought about flight itself. The revolution had begun with one test pilot who refused to accept limitations, but it would be carried forward by thousands of pilots from dozens of species, all united by a simple human principle. There's always another way to solve the problem. You just have to be willing to look for it. Alpha Team split up, each pilot taking a different route through the debris field. The raiders, expecting a conventional approach, found themselves facing attacks from multiple directions while trying to navigate around the wreckage obstacles. Mordeck struck first, his ship emerging from behind a section of twisted hull plating to deliver a devastating attack on the lead raider. Kextar followed immediately, his precise shots disabling a second raider's weapon systems. The remaining raider ship tried to flee, but found its escape route blocked by more debris. Jake's fighter appeared in front of it, weapons charged, and ready. Surrender or be destroyed, Jake transmitted on an open channel. The raider ship powered down its weapons and began transmitting surrender codes. "Well done, Alpha Team," came Veltara's voice over the comm. "Proceed with survivor extraction." As Jake docked with one of the merchant ships to begin transferring survivors, he heard Kextar speaking quietly to Mordek. "I was wrong about humans." "Again," the Vegan pilot said. "How so this time?" asked the Altarian. "I thought they were just innovative, but they're more than that. They're revolutionary." Jake smiled as he helped the first group of survivors aboard his ship. The Academy was learning that human pilots didn't just think differently. They changed how everyone else thought too, and they were just getting started. The rescue mission changed everything at the Academy. News of Alpha Team's unconventional success spread throughout the Galactic Union's military network. Within days, Jake found himself the subject of intense scrutiny from high-ranking officers who had never paid attention to human pilots before. Admiral Thisara herself arrived at the Academy for what she called a routine inspection. But everyone knew she was there to see the human who had revolutionized a rescue operation using nothing but space debris and creative thinking. Jake sat across from the Admiral in Commander Zethkar's office, feeling smaller than ever under her intense gaze. Her scaled features revealed nothing as she reviewed his training records and mission reports. "Pilot Morrison," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battle. "Your methods are highly irregular." "Yes, Admiral," Jake replied, unsure if he was being praised or criticized. "They're also highly effective." She set down the reports and leaned forward. "I've been flying combat missions for 40 years. I've seen every tactical innovation, every new strategy, every supposed breakthrough in military aviation. Most are variations on existing themes." Jake waited silently, sensing there was more coming. "Your approach is different. You don't improve existing tactics. You ignore them entirely and create something new." The Admiral's eyes fixed on his. "The question is, can you teach others to think the way you do?" I'm not sure, Admiral. I don't really understand how I think differently. I just see problems and try to solve them." Perhaps that's exactly the point. Admiral Thisara stood and walked to the window overlooking the training fields. "The Union has been fighting the same wars the same way for centuries. We've perfected our techniques, refined our strategies, optimized our equipment, and we've become predictable." She turned back to face Jake. "Our enemies have learned to counter our standard approaches. They know how we'll attack, how we'll defend, how we'll respond to various threats. They've adapted to our predictability." "But if we become unpredictable," Jake began. "Exactly. If we can teach our pilots to think like you do, to see opportunities where others see obstacles, to turn disadvantages into advantages, we gain a significant strategic edge." Commander Zethkar, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. "Admiral, are you suggesting we restructure the entire flight training program around one human's unconventional methods?" "I'm suggesting we learn from them," the Admiral corrected. "Morrison, I'm transferring you to our Advanced Tactical Development Program. Your new assignment is to work with our best instructors to develop training methods that encourage innovative thinking." Jake felt overwhelmed. "Admiral, I'm still a student myself. I barely understand your technology, let alone how to teach others." "That's precisely why you're perfect for this job," she replied. "You approach our technology without preconceptions. You see possibilities that we've overlooked because we're too familiar with how things are supposed to work." Over the following weeks, Jake found himself in a completely different role at the Academy. Instead of being the struggling student trying to keep up with more naturally gifted pilots, he became a consultant helping instructors rethink their teaching methods. The process wasn't easy. Many instructors resisted changes to training programs that had worked for decades. Students struggled with concepts that challenged their natural instincts. More than once, Jake wondered if Admiral Tessara had made a mistake. The breakthrough came during a session with a group of advanced students who were preparing for their final combat certifications. They had been struggling with a simulation that required them to defend a space station against overwhelming odds. Every attempt followed the same pattern. The students would set up defensive formations around the station, engage the attacking forces, and eventually be overwhelmed by superior numbers. They were flying perfectly according to doctrine, but doctrine wasn't enough to win. "What if we don't defend the station?" Jake suggested after watching their fifth failed attempt. The students looked at him as if he had suggested abandoning their mission entirely. "The objective is to protect the station," pointed out Yixtal, a promising Xerion pilot. "How do we do that without defending it?" "What does the station need to survive?" Jake asked instead of answering directly. "Structural integrity, power, life support," replied Kesa'ara, an Altarian student. "And what threatens those things? Enemy weapons fire." "So the station needs to not get shot," Jake said simply. "Defending it is one way to accomplish that. But it's not the only way." He pulled up the simulation display and highlighted the attacking force. "Look at their approach pattern. They're expecting us to meet them with defensive formations. Their entire battle plan assumes we'll fight them in open space around the station." "Because that's what military doctrine demands," Yixtal said, confusion evident in her crystalline structure. "Military doctrine is based on fighting similar forces with similar capabilities," Jake explained. "But what if we're not similar? What if we use capabilities they don't expect?" Jake manipulated the display to show a different approach. Instead of forming defensive lines around the station, he showed Zethkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Perhaps students aren't supposed to, but maybe pilots should be." The debate was interrupted by an urgent alert from the Academy's Communications Center. Zethkar activated the message, and the face of Admiral Tessara appeared on the main screen. Her scaled features were grim. "Commander Zethkar, we have a situation. A merchant convoy has been attacked by raiders in the Outer Rim. 2 ships are still intact but trapped. We need your fastest, most skilled pilots for an immediate rescue mission." "How immediate?" asked Zethkar. "Launch in 2 hours. This is not a simulation." The connection ended, leaving the room in silence. A real rescue mission was exactly the kind of high-pressure situation that could make or break a pilot's career. More importantly, civilian lives were at stake. "I'll take Mordek, Kekstar, and Thelnara," Veltara said immediately. "Alpha Team has been performing well." "What about Morrison?" asked Zethkar. Several instructors spoke at once, their voices overlapping in disagreement. Some argued that Jake was too inexperienced for a real mission. Others pointed out that his unconventional thinking might be exactly what the situation required. "He stays," Clixith said firmly. "This is too important to risk on an untested human." "His test scores say otherwise," Veltara countered. Zethkar raised a hand for silence. "Morrison has earned his place through performance. He goes with Alpha Team." An hour later, Jake found himself in the equipment bay, suiting up for his first real mission. The atmosphere was different from training exercises. The other pilots moved with focused intensity, checking and rechecking their gear. "Nervous?" asked Mordek, securing his combat armor. "Terrified," Jake admitted honestly. This is real. People's lives depend on us. Good, said the Altarian warrior. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence gets you killed. Kextar approached, his crystal structure displaying colors Jake had learned indicated concern. Morrison, you should know that some of the instructors didn't want you on this mission. I know, Jake replied, checking his emergency supplies. Do you think they were right? Ask me after we bring everyone home, Kextar said. The rescue ships were different from the training craft. These were military, fighters, armed with real weapons and equipped with life support systems for rescued civilians. Jake ran through his pre-flight checklist with extra care, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. Alpha Team, this is Control, came Veltara's voice through the comm system. Mission briefing in 5 minutes. The 4 pilots gathered around, a holographic display showing the rescue site. 2 merchant ships hung dead in space, surrounded by debris from their destroyed escorts. Worse, long-range sensors detected raider ships still in the area. The raiders hit the convoy 6 hours ago, Veltara explained. 2 merchantmen survived by playing dead, but they're running out of air. Our job is to extract the survivors and get them to safety. What about the raiders? Asked Thelnara. 3 ships still in the area, probably waiting to see if anyone comes for the survivors. They'll run when they see military fighters, but they might try to take shots at the merchant ships before they leave. Jake studied the tactical display. The merchant ships were positioned badly, sitting exposed in open space with no cover nearby. The raiders would have clear shots at them during any rescue attempt. Standard extraction protocol, Veltara continued. Mordek and Kextar will provide cover while Thelnara and Morrison dock with the merchants and transfer survivors. Wait, Jake interrupted. What if we don't use standard protocol? The other pilots looked at him with varying expressions of surprise and concern. Morrison, this isn't training, Veltara said sharply. We follow established procedures for real missions. But the established procedures assume the enemy will behave predictably, Jake argued. What if they don't run when they see us? What if they decide to destroy the merchant ships rather than let us rescue the survivors? Then we stop them, Mordek said simply. 4 against 3, in open space with civilians to protect? Jake shook his head. We need a better plan. Such as? Asked Thelnara, her crystalline form pulsing with curious colors. Jake manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the rescue site. Look at the debris field. Pieces of the destroyed escort. Ships are scattered all around the area. Most of it's small stuff, but there are some large sections still intact. Debris is a navigation hazard, Kextar pointed out. Standard protocol is to avoid it. Standard protocol assumes we want a clean, predictable engagement, Jake replied. What if we want the opposite? He highlighted several large pieces of wreckage on the display. These sections are big enough to hide behind, but small enough to move if we push them with our ships. We could use them to create cover for the rescue. Operation. That's insane, Veltara said flatly. Maneuvering debris during combat? You could cause collisions, damage the merchant ships, or get yourself killed. Or we could save lives that standard protocol might lose, Jake countered. The team fell silent, considering the proposal. Finally, Mordek spoke up. In my culture, we have a saying, the unexpected blow wins the battle. Morrison's plan is certainly unexpected. It's also dangerous, Thelnara added. But it might work. Kextar's crystal structure displayed thoughtful patterns. The debris would disrupt the raiders' targeting systems, make it harder for them to get clean shots at the merchants. Veltara looked torn between following protocol and trusting her team's judgment. Control won't approve this plan. Then don't tell them, Jake suggested. We use standard formation until we reach the site. Once we're there, we adapt to the situation. After a long moment, Veltara nodded grimly. Alpha Team, launch when ready. The 4 fighters left the academy and jumped to hyperspace. The trip to the rescue site took 30 minutes, giving Jake time to think through his plan in detail. He had convinced his team to try something risky, and now he had to make sure it worked. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the debris field. The scene was worse than the briefings had suggested. The destroyed escort ships had been completely obliterated, their remains scattered across several thousand cubic kilometers of space. The 2 surviving merchant vessels hung motionless among the wreckage, their distress beacons painting them as obvious targets. I have 3 contacts bearing 187, reported Kextar. Raider configuration, holding position 2,000. Kilometers from the merchants. They're waiting for us, Mordek observed. Probably hoping we'll come in fast and careless. Alpha Team, implement rescue protocol, Veltara ordered over the comm. But her private channel to the team carried a different message. Morrison, you have 5 minutes to make this work. Jake's ship broke formation and dove into the debris field. The other pilots watched as he began pushing large sections of wreckage, using his ship's engines and gravitational field to nudge them into new positions. What is he doing? Came a transmission from one of the raider ships. Jake's comm system picked up their unencrypted chatter. Is that idiot trying to clear a path? The raiders began moving toward the merchant ships, apparently deciding to eliminate the survivors before the rescue could be completed. But as they advanced, they found their route blocked by the debris Jake had been repositioning. Navigation hazard, reported one raider pilot. I can't get a clean approach vector. Go around it, ordered their leader. But every time the raiders tried to circumvent an obstacle, they found another piece of wreckage in their way. Jake had spent his 5 minutes creating a maze of debris that forced the raiders to take longer, more predictable paths toward their targets. Now, Jake called to his teammates. Changed our approach? Changed it how? Asked Thelnara. Every formation manual I've read assumes all pilots have the same capabilities, Jake explained. Same reaction times, same spatial awareness, same natural instincts. But we don't, he pulled up a tactical display showing their practice formation. Kextar, you're the fastest and most precise. Mordek, you're the strongest and most aggressive. Thelnara, you're the most calculating and steady. And you? Asked Mordek. I'm the one who thinks differently. Jake manipulated the display, showing a modified formation structure. What if instead of trying to make me fly like you, we design a formation that uses what each of us does best? The display showed Jake's ship in an unusual position, offset from the traditional diamond formation. Instead of maintaining a fixed position relative to the others, his ship would serve as a flexible element, adapting to changing conditions while the others held their precise formation. That's not how formation flying works, Thelnara protested. That's not how it's always been done, Jake corrected. But that doesn't mean it can't work. Kextar studied the proposed formation. It would require perfect communication. Any mistake could cause a collision. Then we don't make mistakes, said Mordek, simply. Morrison, show us how this would work. They returned to the simulators for another practice session. The modified formation felt strange at first. Jake's position seemed chaotic compared to the rigid precision of traditional formations. But as they flew, something interesting began to happen. When the formation encountered an obstacle, Jake's ship would adjust first, finding the optimal path and guiding the others through. When they needed to change direction quickly, Jake would scout ahead while the others maintained their positions. When precision was required, Jake would fall back and let his teammates' natural abilities take the lead. "It's working," Thelnera admitted after their first successful run through the course. "It shouldn't work, but it does." "It works because we're using our differences instead of hiding them," Jake explained. "I can't fly like you, but I can do things you can't do either." Their second practice run was even better. Their third was nearly perfect. By the time they were called for the actual test, Alpha Team had developed something none of the instructors had seen before. The test course was more challenging than the practice simulations. Tighter gates, sharper turns, obstacles that required split-second timing to navigate safely. The other teams flew with impressive precision, maintaining their formations exactly as the manuals prescribed. Alpha Team flew differently. Jake's ship moved like a scout, darting ahead to identify the best path through complex obstacles. When the formation needed to contract, he would guide them into position. When they needed to expand, he would show them where the safe spaces were. His teammates maintained their disciplined positions, while Jake provided the flexibility that made their formation adaptable to any situation. "Unconventional," murmured Commander Zethkar from the observation deck, "but effective." The final challenge was a narrow canyon that required the formation to fly single file through a twisting passage. Traditional doctrine called for the lead pilot to guide the others through while maintaining constant speed and direction. Jake had a different idea. Instead of taking the lead position, he dropped to the rear of the formation. As they entered the canyon, Jake began calling out obstacles and course corrections before the lead pilot could even see them. "Sharp left turn in 3 seconds," Jake's voice came through the comm. "Followed by immediate climb, debris field at bearing 270. His teammates responded to his guidance with perfect precision. Jake couldn't see through the canyon better than they could, but he was processing the sensor data differently, identifying threats and opportunities faster than anyone expected. Alpha Team emerged from the canyon with the best time of any group, despite using a formation structure that appeared chaotic to outside observers. After the exercise, the 4 pilots gathered in the debriefing room. The other teams looked at them with expressions ranging from confusion to admiration. "How did you know about the debris field?" asked a pilot from Beta Team. "It wasn't on any of the charts." "Sensor sweep," Jake replied. "I was monitoring passive scans while we flew. The debris was small enough that most people would ignore it, but large enough to damage a ship if you hit it wrong." Instructor Veltara entered the room carrying the official test results. "Alpha Team, approach." Jake and his teammates stood at attention while Veltara reviewed their scores. "Your formation structure was highly irregular," she began. "Your communication protocols deviated significantly from Academy standards. Your tactical positioning contradicted established doctrine." Jake felt his heart sink. They had performed well, but apparently not according to the rules. "However," Veltara continued, "your results were flawless. 0 formation breaks, optimal course times, perfect coordination under pressure. Whatever you were doing, it worked." She handed the results to Mordek. "Congratulations. You've set a new Academy record for formation flight." As the teams dispersed, Jake found himself surrounded by curious students asking questions about their unconventional approach. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, he wasn't sitting alone. "You know," said Kextar, his crystal structure displaying colors of genuine friendship, "I think I was wrong about humans." "How so?" asked Jake. I thought you were just primitive, but you're not primitive at all. You're innovative. Jake smiled at the compliment, but his mind was already moving, ahead to tomorrow's challenges. The Academy was beginning to understand that human pilots brought something unique to the table. He just hoped they were ready for what came next. The Academy's senior staff gathered in Commander Zethkar's office 3 days after the formation. Flight tests. The room was filled with tension as instructors debated what they had witnessed. "The human is disrupting everything," complained Instructor Clixith, his insect-like features twitching with agitation. Students are starting to question established methods. Some are even trying to copy his unconventional approaches. Flight Instructor Velterra disagreed. Morrison's methods produce results. His team's performance was exceptional. But at what cost? Clixith shot back. Military aviation requires discipline, order, predictability. This human introduces chaos. Commander Zethkar listened to the debate while studying Jake's training records on his desk display. The human's scores were consistently high, but more importantly, his presence was changing how other students approached problems. "What concerns me," said another instructor, "is that Morrison seems to ignore limitations. Yesterday he suggested modifications to the training fighters that our engineers said were impossible." "Were they?" asked Zethkar. "Well, no. The modifications would actually improve performance, but that's not the point. Students aren't supposed to redesign equipment." In the hangar, Jake climbed out of his fighter to find the other students staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to respect. The casual mockery from earlier was nowhere to be found. "How?" asked Kextar, his crystal structure displaying colors that indicated genuine curiosity rather than superiority. Jake began removing his flight gear. "I watched what everyone else did. I saw what the defenses expected. Then I did something different. Using asteroids as cover isn't original," pointed out Mordek, though his tone was more thoughtful than dismissive. "I didn't use them as cover," Jake corrected. "I used them as weapons. I turned the environment against the defenses instead of trying to overcome them with pure skill." Velterra approached from the control room, her expression unreadable. "Morrison, that was highly unconventional." "Was it against the rules?" Jake asked. The instructor paused. "No. The mission parameters were clear. Reach the target and destroy it. How you accomplished that was up to you." "Then I don't see the problem." Velterra's scales shifted to a pattern Jake had learned indicated thoughtfulness. "There is no problem. But there is a question. Where did you learn to think like that?" Jake shouldered his gear bag. "I'm human. We've been fighting wars with inferior equipment for our entire history. You learn to be creative when you can't win with strength alone." As Jake walked toward the exit, he heard Kextar speaking quietly to Mordek. "Maybe we underestimated him. Maybe we underestimated all of them," the Altarian replied. Jake smiled to himself as he left the hangar. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he was already looking forward to finding new ways to surprise his instructors. The Academy was starting to realize that human pilots might be different from what they expected. But they had no idea just how different things were about to become. Word of Jake's unconventional victory spread quickly through the Academy. By the next morning, instructors from other departments had found excuses to observe the human pilot's training. The cafeteria buzzed with quiet conversations as students discussed what they had witnessed. Jake seemed unaware of the attention. He sat alone at his usual table, eating what the food synthesizers considered human-compatible nutrition, and reviewing technical manuals on his tablet. The isolation didn't appear to bother him, but it bothered some of the instructors. Commander. Zethkar approached Jake's table during the morning meal period. Morrison, may I join you? Jake looked up from his reading. Of course, Commander. Zethkar settled his bulky frame into the chair across from Jake. Up close, the human looked even smaller and more fragile than from a distance. It was hard to believe this slight creature had outperformed some of the Academy's most promising students. I've been thinking about yesterday's exercise, Zethkar began. Your approach was unlike anything we've seen before. I noticed the other students avoid me now, Jake replied calmly. Did I do something wrong? Wrong? No? Different? Very much so. Zethkar studied the human's expression, looking for signs of pride or arrogance. He found neither. How do you feel about your performance? Jake shrugged, that peculiar human gesture. I solved the problem I was given. Isn't that what training is for? Most species solve problems using their natural advantages. Superior reflexes, enhanced senses, instinctive combat awareness. You don't have those advantages. No, I don't, Jake agreed. So I use what I do have. Which is? Jake set down his tablet and considered the question. Curiosity, I guess. Humans are good at looking at things from angles other species don't. Think of. We're also good at making tools and weapons out of whatever's available. The asteroids, Jake confirmed. Every other pilot saw them as obstacles to avoid. I saw them as resources to use. Zethkar found this fascinating. In all his years of instruction, he had never encountered a species that treated their environment as a potential arsenal. Most races had evolved specific advantages for survival. Humans seem to have evolved the ability to turn anything into an advantage. Today's exercise will be different, Zethkar warned. Formation, flying. You'll be working with a team, Jake nodded. I've been reading about it. Looks challenging. It requires trust, coordination, and the ability to function as part of a unit rather than an individual. Very few species struggle with this concept. But you think humans might? Zethkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Humans have a reputation for independence. Some might say stubbornness. Some might, Jake agreed with what might have been a smile. I guess we'll find out. An hour later, the students assembled in the briefing room for formation flight training. Instructor Veltara stood before a holographic display showing a complex, three-dimensional course. Formation flying is the foundation of military aviation, she announced. Individual skill means nothing if you can't work with your squadron. Today you'll be flying in groups of 4, maintaining precise positions while navigating this course. The display showed a series of obstacles that required coordinated movement to pass through safely. Gates too narrow for ships flying alone. Barriers that required synchronized barrel rolls. Challenges that could only be overcome by pilots working in perfect harmony. Your formations have been pre-assigned, Veltara continued. Group Alpha, Mordek, Kextar, Felnara, and Morrison. Jake felt the eyes of his teammates on him. Mordek's expression was unreadable behind his combat mask. Kextar's crystal structure displayed cautious optimism. Felnara, a graceful Zarian crystal being, seemed curious about working with the human. Great, muttered someone from another group. The human's going to drag down Alpha Team. Veltara's sharp hearing caught the comment. Formation flying reveals character, cadet, judge performance, not species. The group spent the next hour in simulation pods, practicing basic maneuvers. Jake found himself struggling with concepts that came naturally to his teammates. Maintaining exact position relative to other ships required a kind of spatial awareness, humans weren't born with. Left wing down 2 degrees, Kextar's voice came through the comm system. You're drifting, Morrison. Jake corrected his position, but within seconds he was drifting again. Formation flying demanded constant micro-adjustments that his teammates made instinctively. For Jake, each correction required conscious thought and deliberate action. This isn't working, Thelnara observed after their third failed practice. Run. Her crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated frustration. The human can't maintain position. Give him time, Mordek said surprisingly. The Altarian warrior had been silent through most of the practice session. He learns differently than we do. But the test is in 2 hours, Kextar pointed out. We need to be ready. Jake had been listening to their discussion while reviewing the flight data from their practice runs. What if we... The next morning brought a different kind of energy to the academy. Combat flight training was serious business. Unlike the gentle curves of yesterday's course, today's arena was filled with obstacles, weapons platforms, and simulated enemy craft. Jake arrived early, as was his habit. He found the hangar already buzzing with activity as maintenance crews prepared the advanced training fighters. These weren't the basic craft from yesterday. These ships were armed, armored, and built for war. Nervous, human, the voice belonged to Kextar, a Vegan pilot whose crystalline structure gave him natural advantages in high-G maneuvers. His tone carried the casual superiority most species showed toward humans. Not nervous, Jake replied, walking around one of the fighters to examine its weapon systems. Curious. Kextar's crystal facets shifted to display colors that indicated amusement. Curious about how badly you'll fail? Other students began gathering around, drawn by the conversation. The Altarian pilot, Mordek, joined them with his massive frame and 6 arms. His species were natural warriors, built for combat in both ground and space. The human thinks he can compete with us, Mordek rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. This should be entertaining. Jake ignored the comments and continued his inspection of the fighter. The weapon systems were unfamiliar, but the basic principles were sound. Energy weapons, projectile cannons, defensive shields. Human technology wasn't this advanced yet, but the concepts were similar enough. Flight instructor Veltara entered. The hangar, her scaled features set in their usual stern expression. Listen up, cadets. Today's exercise is simple in concept, complex in execution. You'll be flying solo combat missions against automated defenders. Your goal is to reach the center of the arena and destroy a priority target. She gestured to a holographic display that showed the training area. It was a maze of asteroids, defensive platforms, and patrol craft. At the center sat a heavily defended space station. The defenders will adapt to your tactics, Veltara continued. They learn from each engagement. What works once may not work twice. You'll be scored on speed, efficiency, and survival. Any questions? Kextar raised a crystalline appendage. What about the human? Shouldn't he start with something easier? Several students chittered with laughter. Jake felt their eyes on him but kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that the best response to mockery was results. Morrison, we'll fly the same mission as everyone else, Veltara said firmly. The Academy doesn't offer participation prizes. The first pilot to go was Mordek. His approach was exactly what Jake expected from an Altarian warrior. Aggressive, direct, overwhelming force. Mordek's fighter charged straight into the defense grid, weapons blazing. His superior reflexes and natural combat instincts served him well. He smashed through the outer defenses, destroyed several patrol craft, and made it to the station in record time. The watching students cheered as Mordek's final score appeared on the display. It was impressive by any standard. Kextar went next. His approach was the opposite of Mordek's. Where the Altarian used brute force, the Vagan used precision and speed. Kextar's ship moved like liquid light, flowing around obstacles and striking, with surgical accuracy. His time was slower than Mordek's, but his efficiency rating was higher. One by one, the other students took their turns. Each showed the natural advantages of their species. The Xerion crystal being calculated perfect flight paths. The insectoid click pilot used swarm tactics learned from his hive mind culture. All performed well within expected parameters. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He climbed into the fighter's cockpit and began his pre-flight check. The systems were more complex than anything humans had built, but Jake's mind was already breaking down the controls into understandable patterns. Weapon. Groups here, shield controls there, engine management in the center. Good luck, human, came Kextar's voice over the comm. Try not to embarrass your species too badly. Jake didn't respond. He was studying the tactical display, examining the arena layout and the paths taken by previous pilots. Each approach had been different, but they all shared common elements. They had treated the exercise as a test of their natural abilities. Jake had a different idea. Morrison, you are cleared for launch, announced Velterra from the control room. Jake's fighter moved away from the academy and toward the arena entrance. But instead of immediately entering the defense grid, he stopped at the edge and began a slow patrol pattern. What is he doing? Jake heard one of the instructors ask over the open channel. Probably scared, suggested another voice. First time seeing real weapon systems. Jake continued his patrol, his sensors active and recording. He watched as the automated defenders reset themselves after the previous engagements. Patrol routes resumed their patterns. Weapon platforms returned to standby mode. The defensive AI prepared for another standard attack. After 5 minutes of observation, Jake finally moved, but he didn't attack the defenses. Instead, he flew to a small asteroid field adjacent to the main arena. The rocks there were too small to hide behind and too numerous to navigate safely at high speed. Every previous pilot had avoided the area entirely. Jake flew straight into it. His ship moved carefully between the asteroids, dodging and weaving through the chaotic field. To the watching instructors, it looked like he was wasting time or possibly lost. But Jake was doing something else entirely. He was stirring up the rocks. The asteroids in the field were loosely held in place by the arena's artificial gravity generators. A ship moving through them at the right speed and angle could destabilize their orbits. Jake's fighter pushed and nudged, using engine wash and gravity fields to set the space rocks in motion. Soon, dozens of asteroids were drifting toward the main arena. Clever, murmured Commander Zethkar, watching from the observation deck. Very clever. The defensive AI detected the incoming rocks and correctly identified them as debris, not threats. The automated systems ignored them entirely, focusing their sensors on Jake's ship as he finally entered the arena proper. Jake's attack began like the others. His ship charged toward the outer defenses, weapons ready. The patrol craft moved to intercept him, following the same patterns they had used against previous pilots. But this time, they had to navigate around the incoming asteroids. The defensive AI was sophisticated, but it had been programmed to handle organized attacks from skilled pilots. It wasn't designed to deal with random space debris complicating its flight paths. Patrol craft found themselves dodging rocks instead of focusing on Jake's fighter. Weapon platforms had their targeting disrupted by asteroids passing between them and their target. Jake pressed his advantage. While the defenders struggled with the unexpected obstacles, he picked them off one by one. His shooting wasn't as accurate as Kextar's, and his maneuvers weren't as aggressive as Mordek's. But he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be unpredictable. The Central Station's heavy weapons opened fire as Jake approached. These systems were too powerful to be disrupted by a few asteroids, but Jake wasn't done with his tricks. Instead of attacking the station directly, he flew past it at high speed. The station's weapons tracked his movement, swiveling to follow his ship. Jake led them in a wide circle, keeping just out of effective range while the massive guns tried to lock onto him. On his third pass around the station, Jake suddenly cut his engines and let momentum carry him forward. The station's targeting systems, calibrated to track powered flight, lost their lock for a critical second. Jake's weapons fired once, precisely into the station's main reactor. The explosion lit up the arena as the priority target was destroyed. Jake's fighter rode the shockwave out of the blast zone and returned to the Academy hangar. Silence filled the observation deck. The final scores appeared on the display, and several instructors had to check them twice to make sure they were reading correctly. Jake's time was faster than anyone else's. His efficiency rating was perfect. His ammunition usage was minimal. He had completed the mission with a score that shouldn't have been possible for a pilot of his supposed skill level. Commander Zethkar stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Flight Academy, watching the new batch of recruits stumble through their basic flight tests. His 4 eyes tracked each ship as they moved through the simple course. Most performed well enough. The Altarians were steady and careful. The Vegan pilots showed their usual precision. The crystal beings from Zerion moved with calculated grace. Then there was the human. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what his species considered amusement. The human pilot, Jake Morrison, sat in a standard training craft that looked far too big for his small frame. Humans were such odd creatures. They had only 2 eyes, positioned awkwardly on the front of their heads. Their reaction times were slow compared to most species. Their bones were brittle, their skin easily damaged. "Look at that," said Flight Instructor Veltara, joining Zethkar at the window. Her scaled arms crossed as she watched Jake's ship wobble through a simple turn. "The human can barely manage basic maneuvers. Why did the Academy accept his application?" Zethkar shrugged, a gesture he had learned from observing humans. "Politics, probably. Earth just joined the Galactic Union. They want representation in everything, even if they're not qualified." The other instructors gathered around, drawn by the spectacle. Jake's ship lurched to the left, overcorrected to the right, then finally steadied itself. The aliens began to chatter among themselves, their various languages creating a symphony of mockery. "Primitive," muttered Instructor Clixith, his insect-like features twisted in disgust. "Humans have only been flying in space for, 200 of their years? We've been doing this for millennia." "Their reflexes are so slow," added Veltara. "Watch how long it takes him to respond to course corrections." Jake's ship approached. A series of floating markers that formed a slalom course. This was basic stuff, something most species could do in their sleep. The human's craft moved like it was stuck in thick mud, turning wide and awkward around each marker. "He's going to fail," predicted Clixith. "No question about it." The other students were already halfway through the course. The Altarian had finished with a respectable time. The Vegan pilot had set a new Academy record for precision. Even the usually cautious Xerion crystal being had completed the run with elegant efficiency. Jake was still on the third marker out of 20. "This is painful to watch," said Veltara. She activated her communication device. "Morrison, you're falling behind. Increase your speed or you'll fail this exercise." Jake's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and steady despite his struggles. "Copy that, instructor." Adjusting approach. The human ship suddenly changed its behavior. Instead of the wide, careful turns he had been making, Jake began cutting closer to the markers. His ship moved differently now, more aggressive, taking risks that made the watching instructors nervous. "What is he doing?" asked Zethkar, leaning forward. "He's going to hit something." Jake's craft dove under a marker, rolled inverted around. Another, then pulled a sharp climb that should have been impossible for someone with his supposed skill level. The ship groaned under the stress, but held together. "Lucky," dismissed Clixith. "Pure luck." But Jake wasn't slowing down. He began to catch up to the other students, his ship now moving with purpose and precision that hadn't been there before. He threaded through the markers like he was dancing, each move flowing into the next. The instructors fell silent as Jake completed the course. His time wasn't the best, but it was respectable. More importantly, his technique had completely changed during the run. "Interesting," murmured Zethkar. "Very interesting." After the exercise, the students gathered in the Academy's main hall for evaluation. Jake sat alone at a table in the back, reviewing data on his tablet. The other species naturally grouped. Together, their conversations filled with confident chatter about their performances. Veltara approached Jake's table. "Morrison, I need to ask you something. Your flying changed dramatically during the slalom course. Explain." Jake looked up with those strange, forward-facing eyes. "I was learning, instructor." "Learning what exactly?" "How your ships handle. How the controls respond. What the limits are." Jake's voice remained calm and matter-of-fact. "The first part of the course was data gathering. The second part was application." Clixith had been listening from nearby. He clicked his way over, his multiple legs tapping on the floor. "You expect us to believe you were deliberately flying poorly?" "Not poorly," Jake corrected. "Carefully. I don't know your technology yet. I needed to understand it before I could." "Use it properly." The alien instructors exchanged glances. This was not how most species approached flight training. Most relied on instinct and natural ability. The idea of treating each flight as a learning experience was foreign to them. "Humans are adaptive," Jake continued, seeing their confusion. "We don't have the natural advantages other species have. No enhanced reflexes, no multiple eyes, no built-in spatial awareness. So we compensate by learning faster and thinking differently." Zethkar found himself intrigued despite his earlier dismissal. "What do you mean, thinking differently?" Jake stood up and walked to the large window that showed the training course outside. "You see obstacles and try to avoid them with superior skill. I see a puzzle to be solved. You rely on what your bodies can do naturally. I rely on what my mind can figure out." The human pointed to the slalom course. "That course was designed for species with better reflexes than mine. But it wasn't. Designed for someone who thinks about it differently. While everyone else was trying to fly through it perfectly, I was learning how to break it." "Break it?" Veltara's scales shifted color, indicating confusion. "Find the shortcuts. The angles you didn't expect, the moves that work, even if they're not pretty." Jake turned back to face them. "That's what humans do. We adapt. We improvise. We overcome. The room had grown quiet. Other students had stopped their conversations to listen. The alien cadets looked at Jake with new interest, while the instructors seemed unsure how to respond. Zethkar felt something he hadn't experienced in years of teaching. Uncertainty. This human didn't fit any of the categories he understood. Jake wasn't the most skilled pilot, wasn't the fastest or most precise, but there was something about his approach that was completely different from anything Zethkar had seen before. "Tomorrow we begin combat flight training," Zethkar announced, to the room. "We'll see how well adaptation works when the pressure is real." Jake nodded quietly and returned to his tablet. But Zethkar noticed something in the human's eyes. Not fear or worry, but anticipation. Like Jake was looking forward to the challenge. For the first time in his long career, Zethkar wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated what he was dealing with. The other instructors began to disperse, but they kept glancing back at the quiet human in the corner. Something had changed in the room, though none of them could quite put their finger on what it was. Jake Morrison continued reviewing his flight data, already thinking about tomorrow's challenges. He had a lot to learn, but that had never stopped a human before.